Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.
Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Lori Baker, and with me today is Mary Kate Karr-Petras, Associate Editor. Mary Kate is going to talk about hand quilting. I am not a hand quilter.
I know this, yes.
So I have lots of questions and lots of things I'm looking forward to learning.
But you have hand quilted.
I have.
And it's not that you don't appreciate it.
Oh no, I love hand quilting.
Yes, you love looking at it. You don't love doing it.
Right.
And that's fine. We're not here today to convince somebody like Lori, who's done hand quilting, that she should take it up, because she knows, you know, and there are folks like that. But what I wanted to talk about is an idea I had that came out of comments I was seeing either on our blog or there's a Facebook group called Celebrate Hand Quilting that I'm a member of. And there are some amazing quilters in that group, and they post photos of their work. And it's just stunning. I mean, the level of work that's being done out there in homes around the world is just amazing. Then there are other people who join and say, oh, I'm nervous, I don't want to post a photo, or I wish I could do that, or I'll never be that good. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about it doesn't matter, kind of. And there's room for all levels of hand quilting. There's no secret handshake. You don't have to be invited to do it. You just decided to start, and that's really all there is to it. But you know, we are lucky at Quilters Newsletter. We get to see the best of the best.
Absolutely.
We get to see, we've featured some quilts on our cover that are hand quilted. And I mean, I'm thinking about, for instance, Jeweled Garden is one. That quilt is just beautiful. And it was such a pleasure to have that in the office and be able to look at it closely and all hand appliqued, and it's just stunning. And I know you've been here since, and you've seen a few as well. Like Album of Roses is one that we had, and that was beautiful. You know, there are a variety of things that we've seen, and or even some of the patterns that we've done. Yeah. Morning Glory.
Morning Glory.
That came from Bellwether Dry Goods, and they're a company that you send them your top, and then they subcontract it out, essentially. They have a group of Amish quilters, and they will quilt your top for you. And we've got to pattern, we've seen a few of those in the office, and we patterned one of them, and it's just straight line quilting, as I recall, but it's just, those stitches are like pinpricks. They're so beautiful and tiny and even. But the whole point is, it's the evenness that matters the most. So we've seen, you know, the best of the best. Now let's talk about hand quilting for the rest of us.
My grandmother used to say that your hand quilting stitches needed to be small enough that you wouldn't catch your toenail in them. Which is amusing, but when you think about it, it's really true. They don't have to be 16 stitches to the inch.
Oh my gosh. I think when I started, I was very focused on what the end product would be, and I was very focused on what the standard would be, and so I read, oh, at 12 stitches to the inch. Well, clearly, if you're not doing 12 stitches to the inch, then what's the point? And I've learned there's a great point, and it doesn't matter. And even that's something that comes up on the that Facebook group, is people will talk about stitch count. Tim Latimer, for instance, he's somebody that we profiled not too long ago in an issue, and he buys vintage quilt tops on eBay or auctions or whatever, and then he finishes them all by hand. He's a hand quilter, and he's the first one to say, don't count your stitches. And there are a lot of award-winning quilters who will say, don't count them. It's a fool's errand. There's no point to it. Make them even. If your stitches are even, then you will have success, and you'll have successful motifs. And these were just some tools that show sort of what you need to get started, and it's pretty simple. A hoop, thread, needles, scissors, water-soluble marker if you want. That's about it. But anyway, let's talk about hand quilting for the rest of us. So this is my first quilt. God, there's so many stories I could tell about what not to do with this quilt, but I hand-pieced the blocks because I didn't have a machine yet, and I didn't want to invest in one until I knew I was going to stick with it. And then I decided to hand quilt it, and I probably started with this block here in the center because the rules say You start in the center, and it's just, you can't even see my stitches.
And that's a good thing to talk about, is if we use matching thread against the background fabric, then your stitches aren't going to be as obvious.
That's true.
If you're a beginner, that's a great place to
That's true.
start.
I was brilliant, I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
But then I got out here, and this block here was probably my last block, because it's a feather motif, and you can't even see it. So the lesson learned is don't waste intricate stitching on a busy print, because you're not going to see it.
It melts into it, doesn't it?
It's just gone, and it goes around here. So you can see it's, you know, it's fine. It's not great quilting. It's been washed a few times, and so it crinkles up, and it gives it kind of that vintagey look.
But you made it, so it's special.
And I made it. I ended up giving it to my grandmother. It's back with us now because she has passed on. But yeah, and I just enjoy when I see a hand quilted quilt, especially one that's vintage, that's older. I love that. You could do this with machine quilting too, but there's something about seeing that single line of thread go through all the layers. There's something about it that it almost seems to exist in time. And now I'm getting really philosophical and
Yes.
highfalutin about it, but I just really appreciate that. I get a sense of the person sitting there putting those stitches in. And I think, so I look at this and I go, it's okay. And you look at it and you say, it's great because you did it.
Yeah.
And even though it's not terribly old, I finished this in 1997, you can appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate you for appreciating my beginning efforts. So let's talk about where I am now. So this is a sample I was working on in preparation for a larger, a lap-sized quilt that I'm committed to investing a lot of time into this year. I've blogged about it, so you can go to the QN blog and read about it and see pictures. But this is the sample that I did. I'm not well known for taking my time to experiment and do samples, but I figured this was worth it. So these are some motifs that I pulled out of a book of Celtic designs, and I made my own stencils, and there are all sorts of tutorials you can find on how to do this stuff. We're not going to take time to do that today. We're just talking about it really doesn't take a lot to get from this to this. And this is not, again, at the level you'd see maybe on that Facebook group or on the cover of QN. It's pretty good though, and
it's more than pretty good.
I say that without ego. Now there's a number of hours. This took hours to do. What I gain in control of my motifs, because I could never do this with a machine.
Right.
I mean, a long armer could do this.
That's
somebody who's really good at free motion quilting could do this. That is not me, and it's not going to be me probably, because my children would be exposed to too many swear words with me trying to figure out how to do this with machine. What I gain in control, I do lose in time. It is a trade-off. There's no doubt about that.
But the precision is awesome.
And if you put in a stitch that you don't like, it's really easy just to back that thread out.
Take one thread out.
Take out a needle full of threads and redo it. And I used a water-soluble marker. As you can see, I marked it pretty heavily. It's kind of bleeding back in there. And I also took some time to test tools, to test my needles. I also blogged about this, so this is on the blog if you want to see more. But I bought some new needles. I had been getting by with what was in my collection for a long time, but I did buy some new needles, and I determined what worked best for me. And I'm not even going to go into what works best for me here. Maybe you can guess by looking at the stitches themselves. But here, this needle actually broke off, you can see. But my tension was too tight. Anyway, we'll go into that some other time. But I just suggest you just experiment. They're not that expensive, you know, in the long run, and you can just experiment and find out what works best for you.
And it might be different for me because of the
Absolutely.
way I hold the needle and the size of my hands and the size of my stitches, so it's worth experimenting.
Same thing goes for thimbles. You know, different thimbles work better for different people, different styles of thimbles, and there are a variety. You wouldn't think it necessarily, but there are a variety of styles of thimbles to leather thimbles. I've tried that, and I didn't really care for it, but some people really like it.
Right.
Just take some time. So, and I'll be blogging about this more. And now that I've said it on camera, now I really have to put some time into that quilt. And let's talk about this quilt. This is a quilt I also wrote about on the QN blog. It's one that I bought at a thrift store for $9. You can't beat that price.
But it's wonderful.
It really is. The blocks are made of vintage 40s fabric. They were hand-pieced. If you get in there and you pull the seams apart, you can see that the blocks, the bow tie blocks, were pieced by hand. Then somebody came along later. She ended up with these blocks, we don't know how, and she joined them by machine, and then she hand-quilted it. So if we look at the hand quilting here, if we pulled out a ruler and measured that, it's not hitting 12 stitches per inch.
No. But it's wonderful.
It's perfect. I think the choice she made for this quilt is perfect.
I agree.
Why would you lay a really elaborate anything, a pantograph, anything? I mean, this just inside the seam line stitching is exactly, I think, what this quilt called for.
That's right.
And it's simple, and I don't know, like I said, I think it's just perfect.
It's perfect for this particular quilt.
And now I get it. I can't believe somebody, maybe I shouldn't put it on camera now. Somebody might see it and be like, that was my family's quilt. So this is something that's more recent. I talked about this actually on Fons and Porter's Love of Quilting that aired in 2013. And at the time, I hadn't finished quilting it because I was making it for a baby who hadn't been born yet. And he's since been born, and he's beautiful and healthy and wonderful. And so I stitched his initials into these blocks here, and I stitched his birth date into this corner here. I'd left the corners unquilted as well because I wanted to personalize them after he got here. This I used big stitch hand quilting on. That's what was called for here.
But you also used machine quilting.
I did. And that was partly time because I was under a deadline, and also because I didn't want to waste time. I didn't feel like hand quilting. You know, I don't really do stitch in the ditch very well. I like to, so I usually just do like a 1/4 inch alongside to do my anchoring. That's just me. I've never heard of a rule that says you can't do machine quilting and hand quilting in a baby quilt in particular.
Well, and I like the look. I think what you gained by the machine stitching combined with the big stitch quilting is really an interesting look.
That's a nice way to put it. It serves its purpose, is how I look at it. It's functional. So I get the anchoring, I get the stability and the strength of the machine quilting where I needed it. And then instead of embroidery, I get the extra oomph of quilting with the big stitch. And there are different needles I use for that. I like to use a chenille needle, but again, there are a variety of needles out there that people use. I like to use pearl cotton size 8. Size 5 is too big for me. It feels like I'm pulling a rope through the fabric. A size 8 or anything smaller, a size 12, for instance, you can experiment. But I love the different colors as we showed. You know, here are a couple of I didn't use this gray on here, but I used this nice pumpkin-y color and the aqua, and just experiment, and it's so much fun. And I can't think of anybody seeing a hand-stitched item or receiving one as a gift and saying, ugh, really? I mean, there's just something about the personality, the personal touch of it that people appreciate. So I just think people should give it a try if they're curious. Don't feel like you have to be stellar your first time out, because you'll get great results within very short order.
I agree.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Kate.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Come back again soon.
Quilters Newsletter TV, the quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.